Hey guys, what's happening? Thanks for tuning in, coming back and watching all that stuff. I hope you're having a super awesome day, and I do appreciate it very much. I am playing around in Luminar 3 today. I'm in my library. I was going through some photos that I took in Italy. We had a trip there a few years ago. We spent a few weeks in Italy. It was amazing, as you can imagine. Any time in Italy is really just amazing. But we started out in Milan, and I set up my... It was mid to late afternoon, something or another. I was in front of the Duomo, their big cathedral, which is a massive, beautiful, just amazing structure. I set up my camera on the tripod, and I had the 10-stop filter on. I did a 2-minute exposure. Here's the photo, and that's what it looked like. It was a little bit too bright, which is okay. The facade is a little bit washed out, but it wasn't blown out. Nothing was really blown out. Even the sky, where it's kind of bright in the clouds, is totally fine. But what I wanted to do is kind of blur out some of that crowd. 2-minute exposure is not long enough to blur out everything, but I was at f22 and 2 minutes with a 10-stop, and that was all the filter I had, so I couldn't really go any longer without starting to blow out the sky. In other words, it was impossible to basically blur out the entire audience, audience, the public, the folks walking around, whatever. But that was okay. I actually kind of like the fact that you can make out people and that they're blurred, because it gives a sense of movement and it gives a sense of activity and kind of buzz. And if you've been there, then you know there's a lot of movement, a lot of activity, and a lot of buzz. However, I went into Luminar and did some edits, and I turned it into that. And there were really a couple of moves that I did with a couple of filters towards the end that really made all the difference. They were minor little tweaks, but they made a big difference. And I'm going to reset these filters, and then I'll jump in and show you what I did. Okay, here we are. Now, the first thing I did was get raw developed. This is a raw file, and I'm in my library, so it's a raw file. And as you can see with raw develop, I went from that to that. So it did an amazing job, really, of pulling back those highlights and those parts, especially in the sky and on the facade of the cathedral, where it looks a little too bright and you're kind of wondering, is that going to recover very well? So a little bit of contrast, took down highlights literally all the way, -100, and a little bit of clarity. So, a decent improvement. Next, I got one of my favorite and I think the most versatile filters in Luminar, and that is tone. And you can see what it did there, right? So again, more contrast. Smart tone, I went negative because smart tone intelligently, reduces, if you're taking it negative, that is, it'll reduce the bright spots without reducing the ones that are already dark, that sort of thing. So it worked well for me to help get a little bit more control over those brighter areas. So there it is, before tone and after. And I took down highlights a little bit more as well. And then I went in and just applied a bunch of negative structure to the sky, which I will show you by turning on the mask. There you go. So I just kind of painted around things. I also, as you can see, I applied it across that audience here of the folks passing by. In other words, I just softened up the details. Not that they were really particularly crisp or visible. There's the before and there's the after. But to me, additional blur and softness in a moving crowd like that gives it more of that hustle and bustle kind of feel. And that's what I was going for, because, as I said, it was a hustle-bustle kind of thing. So at this point, I was like, well, except for a few spots in the sky, which are incredibly evident, which I just went ahead and took care of on the next layer. I got rid of those. I was kind of liking the photo, and I thought, I think I'm about done. But then I was, just being a curious type, and I think curiosity is like one of the most important, probably actually, I think the most important characteristic of a photographer, and that is, you're just kind of curious. So you're going to look around the corner and see if there's a shot, or you're going to grab another filter and see if there's something else you can do, which I do a lot. So I said, well, what else can I do, or should I do? So I realized I had applied that negative structure on the sky and the foreground and even those side buildings, because I really want to focus on kind of the details in the facade of that building, of the Duomo. So I went back and I grabbed that mask. I didn't grab that mask. I went back to that first layer of my raw file, went to the structure filter where I applied the negative structure and painted it into the sky, etc. I copied the mask. I came over here and then I applied it and inverted it onto a structure filter again. So basically, I just took the mask and flipped it, if you will, also on another structure filter and applied structure. In other words, I added a little bit of crispiness to the details in the facade of the cathedral. The only reason I did it on a separate layer is because I forgot to do it on the first layer. Normally I would do those things kind of in tandem, but I think what happened was after I'd applied that negative structure, I smoothed out some other spots that were in the sky. That's something you may notice when you apply negative structure. Because it's smoothing things out, it'll often smooth over some of the smaller kind of blemishes, if you will. I had a ton of spots on my lens or on my sensor, I don't know what, but it was a mess apparently. So the negative structure smoothed out a lot, and then I went to the erase layer because I was thinking about, hey, I smoothed some spots, let me go get the rest of them, and I just forgot to add that positive structure to the facade. So that's why I did it on a separate layer. Okay, next I just went and got adjustable gradient. Let me turn that on, and you can see that was applied. If I hit set orientation, you can see that I set that orientation fairly low in the photo. And all I wanted to do was come over here to the bottom section, add some contrast, take down the exposure, and I cooled it off a little bit simply because I didn't want it to be too warm. I liked the little darker look to the, I guess it's tile. I don't remember. This has been a few years. But the tile, let's call it, is a little bit darker, and I wanted to accentuate that a little bit by cooling it off. So I took the warmth to the left, and there's the before. You can see it's quite a bit warmer and brighter, and now it's a little bit darker and cooler. So basically kind of accentuating the contrast between the upper part of the frame and that lower part. I don't know, it just visually it set it off for me in a good way, so I went for it. And here's really the stuff that I was talking about, and this is a couple of minor tweaks that I think made a big difference. Color contrast, I'm going to go ahead and turn that on, and you can see the difference in the photo. Color contrast is not a filter that I talk about very much, but it's really powerful. So all you do is you pick a hue, so a color, if you will, and for whatever color you pick, you can just drag the amount slider. And what color contrast does is it'll basically take the color that you've chosen and it'll lighten that one, and then it'll go find the color that's on the opposite side of the color wheel and it'll darken that one. So let me turn this off again. If you look at the sky and the facade of the cathedral, effectively they're blue and yellow, which are effectively opposite colors on the color wheel. And so I chose a blue hue here, and then I only went to 12, so it didn't do a whole lot, but you can see it definitely lightened the sky because the blue is getting a little bit dark. And this was 2 minutes in the middle of the afternoon. Not that you can kind of tell it's afternoon, but I didn't want the sky to be dark. I'm not trying to overly dramatize it or anything like that. So I wanted the sky a little bit lighter. So I could have probably got HSL and increased the luminance of the blue, but I was trying this color contrast, and I don't know, it looked pretty good. So I'm at 12. If I go like this, it really accentuates that contrast, because if you think about it, contrast, I'm just go back to 12 before I talk about this. Contrast is just basically the difference between light and dark. That's really all contrast is. So I'm just creating a lighter blue, and so the opposite of that is a darker yellow. Again, I only went to 12, so you're mostly seeing it in the blue and not the yellow, but that's what that's about. Next was I went and added a negative vignette. So when I added this adjustable gradient, look at the bottom two corners of the photo, okay? So let me go back to adjustable gradient. Let me turn that off. Bottom two corners, right? The whole bottom is brighter before I add that. But when I do add that contrast, it darkens the bottom, which was my intent, but I feel like it overly darkened the bottom corners. In other words, it kind of added a vignette to those bottom corners. I didn't want a vignette. I don't really want the corner. They're too dark. It looks like I added a vignette just in those corners. So here's a little trick you can do, and that is you can take the vignette filter, and then I just applied it with a gradient mask. And so instead of having, by the way, I did a positive vignette. If you look at that, there's before and there's after. Usually with vignette, you go like that and it'll darken, the edges of the frame. But I went to the right and I lightened the edges of the frame, but I didn't want the upper corners being white. A white vignette to me is like not a good look. I don't think I would ever do that. Personal preference. I'm not going to judge you if it's a look that you like. It's something I just don't really like at all. But I like a regular vignette, a darker edged vignette. However, in this case, I did exactly what I said I don't like, and that's because it solved a problem for me. And the problem was I had two dark corners from adding so much contrast in the bottom with this adjustable gradient filter. So I just added a positive vignette, a negative vignette, an opposite vignette, whatever. I made it white. around the edges, and then I just took a gradient mask, because you can apply any filter, including Vignette, with a mask. So I just grabbed a gradient mask, and I stuck it on the bottom of the photo, and guess what? It applied the Vignette filter with the white edges just in the bottom of the filter photo. I hope that makes sense. I hope it does, because I feel like I've explained it a lot, and I'm just rambling now. So that was a cool little trick that I don't think I've ever talked about before. I've probably done that on other photos, but I don't know if I've really ever talked about it. So I thought that came in handy. The last couple of touch-ups, I went and added tone, and that is, I wanted to kind of brighten the image. So, well, I did want to brighten the image. Let me show you the before. Again, it's a little too dark for me because it is an afternoon shot. So I brightened the image, which was I took the exposure slider to the right in tone. And then the last thing was I came into HSL, and I took the luminance of the yellow all the way left, and that made a huge impact, I think, on the facade of the cathedral. So if you look at it before, there it is, before adding HSL with negative 100 luminance on yellow, and after, there's a little bit of yellow in there, so the impact is not huge in terms of it doesn't really significantly darken the facade of the cathedral, but it definitely impacts it. And what that does is it allows you to get a crisper looking facade, right? So let me show you the before. Here it is before. It's bright enough that I feel like you're losing a little bit of the crispiness and the detail. And that's kind of the thing for me in this photo. So now when I add that, you can see it shows up much more crisply, and I thought that worked out pretty well. So those were 3 little tricks that I think worked pretty well for me, and that was color contrast, vignette, and just applying that with a mask, and with the negative luminance on the yellow. You know, I knew the yellow was represented in the facade, and I just played with it, and I'll show you at 0. There it is, kind of bright, so I just like, I'm going to take this negative, and I just kind of started going and going, and I went all the way to 100, and I was like, it actually looks perfect like that. So that was it for this video, my friends. Let me show you the before. Not a little too bright. It's too bright. Even at f/22, you know, tightest aperture I could get, which means it takes longer for the light to get in. And on top of that, I had a 10-stop filter on, and I ran it for about 2 minutes, and that was what I got. So I probably should have run it for like 1:45 or 1:30, but whatever. Regardless, I was able to pull it back. And now that I see that, I actually might go reduce some of that structure that I masked into the facade, because it's getting a little bit crispy looking. And so I can take that down because I masked it in up there. And it's still playing well with the negative luminance reduction that I did here in HSL on the yellow. Anyway, my friends, I wanted to walk through those tips and tricks. Here's before and after. I think we came a long way, and you know, I've been rambling a bit, but this was 10 minutes of me editing and experimenting and just doing general cleanup. Now, some of you may not like this little, I think it's called a specular highlight, I don't know, but you know, it has to do with the light hitting the lens or whatever. It didn't really bother me, but I wanted to point out that yes, I did see it, and no, I didn't take it out. Maybe I will take it out, I don't know, but I'm not going to do that in this video. But I'm not blind, I did see it. I just chose to not take it out when I used the erase image layer earlier. That's it, my friends. I hope this helps. I mostly just wanted to share those little tips and tricks that I did at the end, because I thought they might come in handy for you. And that's it for today, my friends. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I hope you're having a super awesome day. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this kind of stuff. And I'll see you real soon with more videos. And we're going to keep having fun. So see you soon. Have a great one. Take care, and adios.